Welcome to Catalyzing Faith, where we seek to be a catalyst for your faith so that you can be a catalyst in the world around you. This is a series called Catalyzing Questions, where our goal is to provide you with answers to some common questions or objections that you'll encounter. And today, we are answering the question, could God create a rock so heavy that even He couldn't lift it? This is one of those classic conundrums that come up time and time again. Could God create a rock that is so heavy that even He couldn't lift it? These types of questions try and demonstrate some sort of inconsistency about the very concept of God. And this question in particular takes aim at the concept of omnipotence. As a refresher, omnipotence is the attribute of God that refers to Him being all-powerful. God can do anything. But what about this question? Does that mean God could create a rock that's so heavy that even He couldn't lift it? It seems that if we accept omnipotence, we're left with no good options. On the one hand, if God can create a rock that's so heavy that even He couldn't lift it, then it seems that we're admitting that in principle, there is a limitation on God's capabilities. That is, there is a rock that could be heavy enough that God couldn't lift it. But on the other hand, if we say that no, God could not create a rock that's so heavy that even He couldn't lift it, it seems we're allowing limitations right from the start, in which case, how can God be omnipotent? So we're left with no good options. But is that really the case? At this point, I'd like to pause and mention something that should be a red flag about questions like this. This sort of question seems obvious. We actually find ourselves wondering why it is that we haven't thought about it before. But before letting a question like this shake your faith, think about it. It seems obvious because it is obvious. So obvious, in fact, that it would be ridiculous to assume that nobody in the 2,000 years of Christian thought had ever encountered it before and provided a decent response. So there's no need to go down any sort of existential rabbit trail and come up with a crisis of faith because you don't have an answer to this question, or any question like it. Instead, start by understanding it's so obvious that someone has probably answered it before, and then you no longer need to come up with the answer yourself. You only need to figure out who has already answered it and then understand the answers they have given. So back to our question. What do we do with this idea of a rock that's so heavy that God couldn't lift it? Sometimes simple questions require simple solutions. And to get our bearings on how to respond to this question, let's instead ask the question, could God calculate the area of a four-sided triangle? All right, right off the bat, there should be alarms going off everywhere inside your head because you know that the concept of a four-sided triangle is itself incoherent. Anything that has four sides is by definition not a triangle. And so the question to ask, could God calculate the area of a four-sided triangle, is to ask about something that is logically incoherent. The question is nonsense and therefore doesn't have an answer. And it's worth pointing out that when someone engages in this type of questioning, where they ask, could God create a rock so heavy that even He couldn't lift it, what they're aiming at is something known as a disproof by contradiction. And these work by assuming the truth of the thing that you're trying to disprove. So in this case, you start by assuming omnipotence. You start by assuming that God can do anything. And the intent is to show that there is a logical inconsistency that follows from this assumption. So what actually happens when we look at the concept of a rock that is so heavy that God couldn't lift it? Well, remember, we've already assumed, in order for this sort of argument to work, that God is omnipotent and therefore can do anything. But if that's the case, then the concept of a rock that is so heavy that even God couldn't lift it is incoherent. It's just as incoherent as the concept of a four-sided triangle, based on the assumptions of our argument. And so to ask, could God create a rock so heavy that even He couldn't lift it, is just as nonsensical as a question as the question, could God calculate the area of a four-sided triangle? But this question can actually help us out because it leads us to realize that the notion of omnipotence is way more robust than saying God can do anything in any sort of naive sense of the word. That instead, it only refers to things that are themselves logically coherent. And another way to think about this is that just because we can string together a series of words does not mean that that series of words actually refers to anything. Think back to that idea of a four-sided triangle. We know what each of those words mean. We know what four means, we know what a side is, we know what a triangle means. But we can string them together in that fashion, and the only thing we get is an incoherent string of words. Similarly, when it comes to the concept of a rock that's so heavy that even God couldn't lift it, we are doing the exact same thing. We are just stringing together words in such a fashion as to be logically incoherent. So when someone asks you, is it possible for God to create a rock that is so heavy that even he couldn't lift it? In a sense, you can say no. But it's not because of any sort of deficiency in God's power. Rather, it's because the concept itself is nothing more than a meaningless series of words, and therefore doesn't refer to anything and is complete nonsense. Thanks for watching this installment of Catalyzing Questions. If you enjoyed this video, guess what? There's plenty of other content here for you to enjoy. So check it out, but before you do, leave us a comment below in this video, hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.